My second book review for you today is The Death of Jane Lawerence by Caitlin Starling. Now, this is my first ever like adult horror novel that I've ever read, so it was really interesting getting to see like the kind of grown-up side of horror, because I do like Stephen King. I've never read any of his stuff, but I do like some of the film adaptations of his work and stuff like that. So this is it's basically Crimson Peak inspired. That was kind of my thing that I was going for. I mean, A Lesson in Vengeance kind of had some Crimson Peak stuff to it, but this one is definitely, I think even in like the synopsis it says it's like Crimson Peak inspired. So The Death of Jane Lawerence is basically about a woman named Jane who marries this guy named Dr. Lawerence, who at first tells him that it's not appropriate for him to get married. She probably shouldn't marry him. But she's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Like, I don't want a traditional marriage anyway. I just need to get married so I don't have to move with my guardians back to this town where her mother died. And so either she gets married to him or she has to leave with her guardians. So she's like, okay, well, I'll just get married. And he's a surgeon, so she's like, you can do your thing at the surgery and I'll do your books, and it'll just be like a marriage of convenience type thing. So he basically tells her that she's never supposed to step foot into Lindridge Hall, which is like his Crimson Peak, or Allerdale Hall, for those who know, who've seen Crimson Peak. He's like, you'll never set foot in this place. But there ends up being a storm on the night of their, like, where they're supposed to consummate their marriage, and the carriage wrecks, so she has to end up going back to Lindridge Hall, and then she finds out that there's a lot of stuff, like, I cannot talk about this book without spoiling it, so there's your spoiler warning, because I have to talk about spoilers now. So you find out through the course of the book that Dr. Lawerence is a magician, and anytime you do magic, it like warps your body and everything. So you find out that he was previously married before Jane, married to Elodie, who was like his childhood sweetheart or whatever, and he went on like vacation or like to a convention or something. I can't remember for the life of me where he went, but he came back and she was suffering from yellow fever. So he takes her down into their like basement, lays her on this like marble altar where him and his family do like magic rituals and stuff. And he's trying to save her, and he ends up killing her. So he ends up trying to use magic to bring her back. But instead of using magic to bring her back, he ends up like cursing Lindridge Hall. So like everyone he's ever like operated on and lost like ends up haunting him. And if he stays away from Lindridge Hall for more than like 3 or 4 days, he gets really, really sick and stuff like that. So that's what Jane finds out. She finds out that he was responsible basically for the death of his previous wife, and she's being haunted by Elodie. And then like by the end, so Dr. Lawerence ends up going crazy and kind of like loses his mind, sort of, and he goes crazy and he tries to operate on Jane like he did with Elodie, because he thinks that she's sick, because he's so delusional and everything from, you know, not really being able to sleep because all these ghosts keep haunting him. So he's not in the right state of mind anyway. So he tries to attack her and like slice her open like Elodie and like try to save her. And so Jane ends up inadvertently like tapping into her own magic and like erecting a marble like wall where the door should be. So he's like locked in the cellar, and she's like, oh shit, what the fuck have I done? So she employs some help of his friends and fellow magicians and is like, hey, I accidentally did this. I need to get him out. How can I do that? So they give her a ritual, and they're like, if you do this correctly, like it should work. But then through her doing magic, it starts like warping her. It's heavily implied that she's pregnant, because at one point Dr. Lawerence and Jane actually consummate their marriage, kind of like how Edith and Thomas Sharp do in Crimson Peak. And so it's heavily implied that she's pregnant, and whatever magic she's doing is like warping the baby inside of her and like turning it monstrous, basically. And it gets really confusing towards the end. It's really hard to explain. So in the end, you find out that Dr. Lawerence has been dead since the first day that he got locked in the cellar. And Jane's ghost is there while he dies, while the alive Jane is doing the magic that like rebuilds him into like the ideal version of himself. So she like creates another version of him. And this version is the one who ends up saving the alive Jane. It's like a paradox loop, which is why it's so hard to explain, where it's like all the times that she thought she was seeing Elodie and like being haunted by Elodie, it was actually herself, like her ghost self from the future, like giving her hints and stuff to like help her get to the point where, you know, she's lying on the marble altar and she's like, hey, let's do this ritual. And he's like, no, I could kill you. She's like, you got to cut this thing out of me. And he's like, no, I could kill you. And she's like, no, because we're going to do a ritual at the same time so I won't die. But she ends up dying, becoming a ghost, and then like ends up helping her past self to get to that point so Dr. Lawerence can cut her open and like take the misshapen, misformed fetus, sacrifice it to appease the ghosts or whatever the fuck they end up actually are in Lindridge Hall. And that saves her. And then Ghost Jane dies. Like past Ghost Jane dies and future Jane ends up living. It's really confusing. Like towards the end I was like, whoa, we're getting into some like time travel and like paradox stuff, which confuses the hell out of me. Despite how many times I've watched like Doctor Who and other things that have like paradox loops where it's like if you end up changing the past, then the future will never happen. So you have to like continue this cycle. So it got really confusing at the end. I mean, I really loved it. I was like, that took a turn that I was not expecting, and I was surprised and I appreciated it. So yeah, that's the very confusing review for The Death of Jane Lawerence by Caitlin Starling. And I guess I will see you guys later. Bye!